Morbidology is a weekly true crime podcast hosted by me, Emily G. Thompson, a freelance writer and author of 5 true crime books.
Oh my God, she was murdered.
It was a murder?
Join me each week on Morbidology as I uncover a new true crime case, using investigative research combined with primary audio.
Where is she, buddy? Where is she?
The devil made me turn her to ashes.
Morbidology is a victim-focused podcast that mostly covers cases that aren't widely documented in mainstream media.
I wanted to be out of jail. I couldn't wait till I got out. I was in there with someone who was clearly psychopathic.
The episodes also take an in-depth look at any systemic failures which may have had a part to play in the crime.
Through our investigation, we have obtained evidence which we are not releasing at this time, which leads us to believe Jolene is not alive.
You can listen to Morbidology across all podcast platforms.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. The man, the myth, the legend. Buford Pusser drove a souped-up, shiny black Pontiac Grand Prix that could catch anything on wheels in McNairy County, Tennessee, with his license plate embossed with one word, Sheriff. He mainly dressed in a white shirt, sometimes a tie, a very conservative look with glossy shoes. Buford rarely carried a badge, and in the beginning of his career, he never carried a gun. That is, until the first time he was shot, which would be quite a regular occurrence, and he decided it would be crazy not to carry one. He started packing a .357 Magnum revolver under his coat and an M16 rifle with a 20-shot clip in his car. Buford wasn't much for staying in the office. He was always in his car, patrolling the 2,000 miles of road in McNairy County, and would go through 2 cars a year. He took his job extremely seriously and was not the kind of sheriff to sit back and not be hands-on. His life story has been portrayed in the Walking Tall movies. Buford had brains and brawn with a fiery passion for taking down the bad guys.
One of the most interesting stories that I ever knew about Buford dealt with a lady that called him when they had domestic problems. It seems that this fellow would abuse his family, come in drunk. One night he threw the cat in the stove. Another night he threw the girls' school books in the stove. She called Buford and said, he's drunk again, Buford. I need some help over here. So Buford got in a patrol car. He went to Adamsville. But he stopped just before he got to the man's house, and he cut him a hickory stick about like your thumb.
John Grant was the man's name, but they called him Flagpole. So Buford went out there in the yard and cut him down a small tree, is what it was. He called it a switch.
Drove on up to the house. The lady come out crying, and Buford said, well, what's the matter this time? Oh, he's down in the barn, she said. He's drunk. Don't go down there, Buford. He'll kill you if you go down there. Buford went down there and drug him out and whipped him with that hickory stick until he wet all over himself.
But he took him by the arm and just wore that switch or what it was out on him. Said, now, Flagpole, I whipped you this time like a kid. But said, if I have to come back out here and you beating up on your family and chasing your in-laws, said, I'm going to whip you like you was a man. He never did have to go back.
Buford Pusser was a superhero to many, but this episode is dedicated to my personal superhero, my dad, who has wanted me to cover Buford's story for a long time. He told me, I'll listen to your show when you finally cover Buford Pusser. So my first episode of 2023 is for you, old man. Let's jump right into it. Buford Pusser was born to Helen and Carl Pusser, who was the police chief of Adamsville, Tennessee, on December 12, 1937 in McNairy County, Tennessee. Buford played basketball and football in high school, standing 6'6". After graduating high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, but he was medically discharged due to having broken his back in 3 places during a car accident while he was in recruit training. Buford had also worked the pipelines in Alabama for a time. He moved to Chicago in 1957 and began wrestling locally as Buford the Bull. He also worked part-time in a funeral home while attending the Worsham College for Morticians. With only $300 in his pocket, he went to visit his family, and on the way to Tennessee, he decided to go into one of the state line bars, which was not a good idea. He said, quote, "They robbed me and cut me so bad that I had to have 192 stitches. As I lay bleeding in the rain, I promised that I would close down those places and make those people pay." He went back to Chicago, stamping his work card, and he had 24 hours to be back and clock out. He was going to get his revenge on the ones who attacked him. Although he didn't have but 24 hours, it was plenty of time for Buford. Quote, "I beat the hell out of the 2 bastards who cut me. I hospitalized them something awful. Then I got in my car and drove back to Chicago, leaving them like they left me." Buford was transferred back to Mississippi a few weeks after to stand trial for armed robbery. Those men that he beat up had him charged with stealing $300 from them, the same amount of money that they stole from Buford. If it weren't for his time card showing that he was at work that day, the jury in Alcorn, Mississippi may have sent him to the Parchman prison for 20 years. 2 years later, on December 5, 1959, he and Pauline Mullins, a mother of 2 from a previous marriage, tied the knot. Buford adopted her 2 children, and later they had a daughter of their own named Dewana. In 1962, the little family went to Adamsville, Tennessee, to live where Buford was police chief and constable from 1962 to 1964. The sheriff, who was currently in office in McNairy County, James Dixie, had died from a car accident. A lot of people believe his death was caused by the state line mob. Shortly after, Buford was elected sheriff, and in all of Tennessee's history, he was the youngest person to ever become sheriff at 26 years old. During his off hours, he still enjoyed wrestling. Of his time wrestling, Buford said, quote, "There's a lot of showmanship involved. I always played the good guy, especially after I came back here and wrestled 4 nights a week in tank towns around the Mid-South. Once, when the circus came to town, he took his wrestling skills there to grapple with a bear. Quote, "It wasn't a very stout bear. I threw him down, and that's about all there was to it. It was only a little bear who didn't have many teeth or claws." Buford's main goal was to get rid of the Dixie Mafia and state line mob. Before we go any further, let's get into who these 2 groups are to get a better understanding of why he wanted to eliminate these groups with a passion. The state line mob were a group of criminals who did their dirty work on the Mississippi-Tennessee state line in Alcorn County, Mississippi and McNairy County, Tennessee, along U.S. Route 45 during the 1950s and 60s. Some of the people in this mob were also in Phoenix, Alabama, but they were all removed when authorities began cleaning up the town due to martial law being put into effect by the governor and Alabama National Guard. Some of their criminal activities included bootlegging, gambling, sex working, tourist fleecing, burglarizing, and killing. They also owned and ran motels, restaurants, and clubs on the state line. Since they owned these places, they made thousands of dollars selling moonshine and other illegal substances. In the 1960s, they became notorious for their ongoing battle with Buford Pusser, Before Buford became sheriff, the state line mob was able to pay off certain law enforcement officials and get away with their crimes. However, Buford always made it known that he could not be bought. One woman named Louise Hathcock was from West Virginia, but moved to North Mississippi. As a young woman, a very bright girl with straight A's, she was a bookkeeper at the State Line Club, and she learned the game. Louise saw how much money there was to be made in a place like that. She eventually came out of her shell and became the owner of one of the restaurants called 45 Grill and a hotel called Shamrock Hotel. She was known as the Queen of the State Line Mob. The first time Louise and Buford ran into each other was right after Buford had been sworn in as sheriff. She immediately attempted to pay him off to keep him out of her hair. People who were there when this happened said Buford refused to take the money and said he would never be able to be bought like that. However, not every policeman was as strong as Buford, and they would cave in, taking the money, which allowed Louise to gain a lot of power and control. Louise was said to be known as ruthless, but some think she was only trying to take care of her family and her employees. She would do good deeds for people, like buy groceries for the ones who were in need, but if you got on her bad side, stood up to her, or even seemed like you could be a threat, she would not hesitate to shoot you or have you shot. Louise did not like anyone trying to come in and ruin her business, which got in the way of her money. Buford always showed up, and that was no good for business. Before Buford was sheriff, he and his friends went to Louise's bar to get some beers, but this was when Buford's dad was the sheriff, so they all had to be on their P's and Q's. The mob tried to get U.S. Navy serviceman Kenneth McCoy, who had just ran in to grab a bite to eat while he was passing through, confronted by the mob. They tried to talk him into playing a friendly game of cards. Of course, the game was rigged for the mob to win. Many times, Kenneth said he'd pass until one mobster kept on and on until Kenneth got irate. He got out of his chair and into the man's face. Realizing he may have made a mistake, he collected himself and said he didn't want any trouble, but it was too late for that. The man jumped on Kenneth from behind and they started brawling. One thing Louise did not allow was fighting in her bar on her watch. Buford and his friends tried to sneak out before the police showed up. Louise attacked Kenneth until she killed him. That haunted Buford but didn't stop him from going back to the bar. Buford found himself on Louise's extremely bad side. Whatever happened, Louise beat him to a pulp and threw him out of her bar like a garbage bag filled with empty cans of beer. Buford had to get about 100 stitches on his face. It was this moment that was the catalyst to Buford promising that he would end the State Line mob for good. When Buford became sheriff of McNairy County, he found out that all the police raids on the State Line mob and their businesses were all phony to make the public feel more at ease and to keep their pockets lined with the mob's money they were giving to them. The mob was always informed beforehand when the police were coming. Buford did attempt to execute a raid when a tip was called in, but he went without a warrant and everything he had taken from them had to be given back, and the charges had to be dropped. Not long after this raid happened, Louise requested Buford to meet up with her in a private room in the Shamrock Hotel. Louise arranged for the cooks to bring Buford the largest steak they had with all the fixings. She tried to charm him and sweet-talk him, but Louise's patience was thin. She couldn't keep being fake with Buford. It wasn't much of her style. Louise got straight to the reason why she asked him to come to her hotel. She told him that she would give him $500 a week to just act as if they weren't even there. Buford turned it down automatically. Louise then asked, "What about $1,000? He said no and stood up from the table. That's the very place and time that Buford, Louise, and the State Line mob became rivals. Due to Buford refusing to let up on the State Line mob, the support for him in Tennessee began to grow. He would drive over to a place across the street from the Shamrock Hotel called the White Iris and keep an eye on the hotel. He wanted them to know he was watching. Louise began miserably suffering from drug and alcohol addiction. She was always paranoid, even off of substances, but alcohol and drugs always made her paranoia worse. The State Line mob started to spread awful gossip about Buford, just as they had done the sheriff before him. They aimed to ruin his reputation. They told people that Buford took all the bribery money and was cheating on his wife at the Shamrock Hotel. They went so far as to even try to get the KKK involved by telling them that Buford was sleeping with a black lady named Pearl Wade, whose family managed and owned a juke joint in Tennessee. In 1964, Governor Paul Johnson was faced with cries from the community to go after the State Line mob, so he executed a raid on the mob. Officer after officer flew down the road to go get them. Louise was arrested along with 4 other people. Her cars were towed away and put up for auction. Police also seized 18 gallons of moonshine. While Louise was in jail, she ordered another mobster to get her cars back from the auction. However, he was outbid and only came back with Louise's Cadillac. On May 22, 1964, Louise killed her husband, Jack Hathcock. She told the police, "It was either me or him." She was cleared of the murder charge due to the killing being in self-defense. Her pistol was returned to her, which would be the same pistol she would use in the future to try and take Buford down. On January 14, 1965, the Shamrock Hotel was raided. During this raid, Louise was arrested for having 2,088 half pints of whiskey on which no state tax had been paid, and McNairy was a dry county. There was also evidence of illegal gambling. 2 of Louise's employees were arrested as well. Louise was bailed out. A court hearing was scheduled for February 25th. Officers remarked that Louise was a powerful woman who was not afraid of the devil himself. In the midst of all of this, on November 13, 1965, the Tennessean newspaper reported an incident that happened in McNairy County. There was a house fire that left 50-year-old Gilbert Keene dead and burned beyond recognition, and the man who owned the home, 60-year-old Elvis Black, was in critical condition. Apparently, the 2 men were drinking alcohol until they fell asleep. The house caught fire, and another man in the home, Ralph Bearden, woke up in a frenzy. He began to pull Elvis out of the house, but the roof fell in on them before they could get to Gilbert. While firefighters and officials were working the fire, 27-year-old Buford was directing traffic when something unexpected happened. A couple pulled out of traffic, and Buford saw that the car was heavily on its rear springs. He was looking at the driver's license when the car started to accelerate forward. Buford said, quote, "I had my head inside the car, holding on to the steering wheel and trying to grab the keys. The woman kept hitting me with what I think was a pipe wrench, and the man apparently had the knife. They were hitting me with a little bit of everything. The couple dragged Buford about 300 yards before he let go, rolling onto the pavement, giving him 2 broken ribs, and the couple got away. He suffered injuries to his head, he was stabbed in the back, and his left arm. Buford stayed the night at the county hospital and was released after. He knew who the couple was and remembered they abandoned their car about 2 miles down the road, running away on foot. Inside of the car, police found 31 gallons of moonshine. The couple was eventually charged with attempted murder, felonious assault, and transporting moonshine whiskey. Meanwhile, Buford and Louise Hathcock continued to feud for 1 more year. It all came to a halt on February 1st, 1966, when Buford served her 2 search warrants for illegal booze and robbery of a purse from someone who was staying at the hotel. This shook up everyone along the state line. On this day, Buford was not going to carry his gun with him, but it just so happened a deputy told him he should carry his .41 Magnum. Since Louise had an arrest warrant for liquor, Buford could withdraw her bail so she could not get bonded out this time. Louise, who was intoxicated with a BAC of .248, asked Buford if he could come to her room so they could properly have a talk about this whole circumstance. Buford trailed behind her and he tried to close the door. There were clothes on the doorknob, so the door would not shut all the way. After he fiddled with the door, he turned around. Louise was not only cursing at him, but she had a revolver pointed at Buford and dropped her glass on the floor. She ran and tackled Buford to the ground, putting the revolver on his face. Louise pulled the trigger at some point, but she was so drunk she missed. The deputies heard a gunshot and ran across the street to the hotel. Buford shot Louise 3 times out of self-defense. 1 shot to the neck, a shot in the left side of her face, and another shot to her right breast. All of the deputies were there to witness it. The queen of the state line mob, at only 42 years old, was no more. Buford was taken into custody while an investigation took place by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Buford was let out of jail when the investigation was over, and the district attorney said he had no doubt that Buford killed Louise in self-defense. In January of 1967, Buford Pusser had been shot when he went up to a car that he pulled over for speeding. He drove himself to the hospital and stayed there for 2 days with facial wounds, an arm wound, and a bullet had grazed his stomach. While this was occurring, 33-year-old Carl Douglas White, who was known as Towhead and at one time was Louise's right-hand man, was a member of the Dixie Mafia. At some point, someone who Buford was sure was Towhead called and threatened to take his 3 children, Michael, Diane, and Dewana, out into the swamps. After that, Buford went after Towhead. He found him and drove him out to the Hatchie River swamps. Buford stated, quote, "I drew my pistol, kicked him into the mud, and said, 'Start crawling, you son of a bitch. Crawl until the elbows and knees of that $200 Italian suit are a part of the swamp.'" Buford forced Towhead to crawl for most of the night. Later, Towhead was arrested and held in Alabama on a federal escape warrant. He was believed to be connected to the shooting that put Buford in the hospital, but Pauline Pusser said that at this time, her husband didn't think Towhead was in the car, but that he was involved somehow. Towhead was supposed to be serving a few years in an Alabama prison for violating liquor laws. However, he made his escape in early December of 1966. 27-year-old Julius Oliver French was in a Decatur, Georgia prison, and he escaped. Julius and Towhead were said to be on the run together, and Julius was possibly involved in the shooting. A special agent from the Mobile, Alabama FBI said Towhead had called him on January 3rd, saying he would surrender. In 1969, when Towhead was released, he was shot and killed in a motel. Buford said, "It couldn't have happened to a nicer person." Of course, rumors swirled that Buford had something to do with the shooting, but one of the deputies said that Towhead would order hits on people and had a bad habit of not paying the hitmen. What they think likely happened was that he did not pay a gunman and he was killed because of it. Buford was hailed as a local superhero. His ongoing feud with the State Line mob gained national attention on August 12, 1967, when an assassination inspired by Louise's husband on Buford absolutely backfired. Buford got a call early that morning about a disturbance on New Hope Road in McNairy County. Paula decided to ride alongside her husband because he did have so many threats on his life that whenever she was able to ride with him, she would. 4 weeks before this, Buford had been warned not to go out to calls by himself in the south region of the county. The anonymous person who called that in even said there would be a possible ambush. As Buford and Pauline passed the New Hope Methodist Church, a speeding car came up beside them, and the people in the vehicle began to shoot at them. Instead of ambushing and killing Buford as intended, it was his wife, Pauline, who was killed by members of the mob. Buford was shot in the left side of his jaw by 2 or 3 rounds of a .30 caliber. The bullet that hit Pauline is suspected to be one of the bullets that went through her and into Buford's jaw. As soon as Pauline was shot and killed, Buford instinctively grabbed her head and cradled her in his lap, driving away, praying out loud, "Oh God, don't let her die. Don't let her die. Please don't let her die." He drove for 8 miles after radioing in what happened with a major head injury before he was met by an ambulance and cop cars. The officers who were on the scene said Buford was completely incoherent, speaking words that nobody could understand. One of the officers said, quote, "It was the worst thing I've ever seen. He was sitting behind the wheel with his wife's head cradled in his lap. He spent almost 20 days at Baptist Hospital in Memphis before he was finally able to go home, though he had to keep seeing the doctors over time because it took many surgeries to restore that side of his face." Kirksey Nix, a very prominent member of the Dixie Mafia, is who Buford said was the contractor of the ones who murdered his wife. Even though Buford said that he would bring these people to justice who killed his beloved wife, he wasn't able to bring Kirksey or anyone else to trial. Kirksey was already in the Louisiana State Pen for murdering a New Orleans grocery worker. While he was serving time, he also ordered a hit on a judge and his wife. In 1990, Kirksey denied being involved in the drive-by against Buford and his wife. The Dixie Mafia was formed in the late 1960s as a group of mainly white Southern criminals. They traveled around the Appalachian states committing robberies, moving stolen goods, illegal alcohol, and drugs. Their main goal was to make money and have control over making money illegally by any means necessary. Whether it was peddling, bribing public officials, or committing murder, they would do anything they could to get their hands on money. The Mafia did not have a chain of command, but they would do whatever the person with the most money at the time would tell them to do. The Dixie Mafia only had one rule: thou shalt not snitch to the cops. Whoever did snitch or testify against their fellow members would be shot and killed. These members were based out of Biloxi, Mississippi, and there was a place called the Strip, which was their territory. Their unofficial kingpin was Mike Gillich Jr., who was a Croatian man who came from a rather large, poor family. Mike basically raised himself in Biloxi, and his goal was to become a rich entrepreneur on the Strip. Mike eventually owned a lot of motels and nightclubs that were also strip joints and allowed gambling and a parlor for bingo. Where Kirksey Nix comes into play is that Mike really protected him. Kirksey was an important member of the Dixie Mafia. There is a whole deep dive we could do into the Dixie Mafia, but for now, those are the basics that have to do with Buford's story. So, the day after Pauline Pusser was killed, a manhunt was underway to figure out who carried out this ambush with high-powered weapons. Weapons that Buford said he could only describe as sounding like machine guns. A Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent directed a search of Buford's car. They pried the bullets out of the car and sent them off for ballistics testing. No weapons were found at the scene. There were no suspects and nothing definite to work off of. All they knew was there were definite motives. Lonnie Green, a highway department employee, said, quote, "I've known Buford Pusser for 15 years. He was cleaning up the bootleggers and moonshiners. The people who had been breaking the law were after him." The bullets were surmised by authorities, just by looking at the bullets, to be from a .30-30 or .30-06 rifle, and they found a shell from a .44 mag pistol. Buford's brother, John Pusser, said, quote, "The officers told me the first set of .30 caliber shots apparently caught Pauline in the back of the head. She fell over on my brother, grabbing him by the arm. He couldn't get his arm loose to pull his pistol, and he stepped on the gas. That car can leave anything. It's a souped-up '67 Plymouth and can do 140. He left them, the officers told me, and thought he had lost them. Then he stopped the car and was trying to help his wife. That's when they came up on him again. They stopped about 5 feet away, point blank, and he had his door open a bit and was trying to get out. They opened up with the carbine, which can fire automatically like a machine gun. It knocked him down on the floorboard. It blew his wife's brains out in a ditch. Whoever it was stayed there with the motor running for a minute, maybe, then sped off and left him for dead. The officers said my brother told them he pulled himself up on the seat, his jaw bleeding and his wife dead, and tried to go after them. He wasn't running away. He was going after them. You have to know the kind of man my brother is to believe that. I know him. He's a great sheriff." When asked about the investigation, a Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent said, "We are investigating around the clock." A policeman stated they were going to keep things quiet and not tell anyone anything. The only thing authorities would say was that there were a few suspects who were questioned and many more would be. There was gossip going around that Buford killed his wife and shot himself to cover it up because they were supposedly having marital problems. About those nasty rumors, Buford said, "I loved my wife. I'd have been pretty damn stupid to blow my own jaw off." Buford rarely ever carried a gun. In fact, when he was elected sheriff, he vowed to never carry a gun, and on the occasion that he didn't use them unless he felt he had to, and people knew that. He only threw a few guns in his car because he was warned about an ambush and Pauline was with him. No matter how many times he was attacked, stabbed, and shot, he still had serious confidence in his ability to take care of himself. Everybody described Buford as a tough, strong man. He was loved by almost everyone and was called the best sheriff because of the way he conducted himself and tried to keep the county clean. One deputy of Adamsville said, quote, "He used to be a wrestler before he became sheriff, and it is nothing short of unusual for him to whip 4 or 5 at a time. 6 men jumped on him not too long ago. He took 3 to the hospital and the other 3 to jail." Buford's brother John said he was a quiet man who would rather advise you than arrest you. Quote, "He's a strong man, proud of his strength, but no bully." A few days later, Buford was moved from the ICU to a secret room which was guarded heavily by police. Buford's jaw was remade with wire mesh, bone, and flesh during 3 surgeries. District Attorney General Will Abernathy said there was progress being made in the investigation. Quote, "We are more hopeful now than at any time during the investigation. We haven't reached the point where anyone is going to be arrested. We are far from that state, but we are hopeful." Governor Ellington was offering the highest reward the state could offer, $5,000 for any information leading to the arrest of the people who ambushed the Pussers. Pauline's funeral was held at the Adamsville Church of Christ, where over 200 relatives and friends gathered in the church, and every wall was covered in flowers. Even back in 1964, one kind gesture led to Buford being stabbed in the chest. He picked up a hitchhiker and told him that he would take him to the jail just to have a hot meal and a bed. That next morning, the hitchhiker stabbed Buford. He was always being attacked, shot, stabbed, beaten with metal chairs, and everything you can think of, but he still kept walking tall. In September of 1968, a singer named Eddie Bond wrote a song about Buford called The Ballad of Buford Pusser. Some of the lyrics go, "Now in McNairy County, Tennessee, the sheriff is still walking tall today, and like a monument he stands for law enforcement in his own relentless way. So if you want to live a life of crime, then brother, I'll advise you not to be hanging around no town in McNairy County, Tennessee." One verse says, "On a backwoods county road, the sheriff and his pretty little wife went investigating trouble, and it ended up by costing him her life. The sheriff is still living, though 2 bullets went a-ripping through his head, but somehow he made it 10 long miles to town, though he'd never been given up for dead." A year later, recounting those moments, Buford said, quote, "I knew the first burst of shots hit my wife. The whole side of her head was gone. I drove for 2 miles and thought I got away from the car, and then it came up on me, and I got the second burst. My chin was hanging on my chest, and they found my jaw 20 feet away in a field. I don't see how I lived. After I got to myself, I looked in the mirror wondering why I couldn't talk. Saw everything gone. My chin was almost in my lap. Blood was spurting everywhere. I headed for town but almost ran out of juice. I tried to talk but could only make blubbering sounds. I was sad when I went down the road, trying to catch the car that did the shooting. Blood just bubbling out." He said they knew who carried out the hit, but they couldn't prove it. The man who did the shooting was from Boston, and they believed he had been killed. Police had traveled to over 10 states looking for the killer, or killers, and raised the reward money to over $7,000, but no one came forward. Buford said, quote, "I had always thought about what a person would feel if he knew he was dying. I knew, and I thought it would have been a relief to die, to go to sleep. I hurt so bad." He said he was feeling better at that point, but for a while he was really weak from bleeding for a month straight, and he had lost all feeling in his jaw. Back in 1967, when he was shot in the mouth, arm, and the bullet grazed his stomach, he joked about that time, saying, quote, "Those bullets made me a dimple," as he pointed to his cheek. About the song written for him, Buford said, quote, "The song written and recorded by Eddie Bond of Memphis is true, and sometimes the truth hurts. If you really listen to the words, it's no slam on the county. Bond came to me and said he wanted to do something for law enforcement. It's rare for a singer to like cops, so I was happy." More of the song goes, "Well, let me tell you a story about a two-fisted, racket-busting cop. Buford Pusser is the name, and many years ago he vowed to put a stop to all the law-breaking, double-dealing, underhanded crimes he knew to be a-going on right there in McNairy County, Tennessee. Watching people being killed while the county turned its head the other way, Buford made himself a promise that he knew that he was gonna keep someday. He was gonna be a lawman, and in one way or another make 'em pay for all the wrong going on there in Murder City, USA. Even the prisoners listened to the song on a phonograph in the jail. They'd taken all the money they had in their pockets to pay for a copy of the record. One man in the jail cell said, "We'd already had a whiff of the song, but since we all knew Buford, we figured we might as well give it a good listen. It's not a bad number, and I guess it's all true. I know one thing, Buford Pusser is one tough son of a bitch. Personally, I'd rather be kicked in the stomach by a mule than tangle with him." It was at this time that there were talks about a movie being made and a book being written about Buford, which did come to fruition a little later. Eddie Long did end up making 5 songs about Buford. Buford Pusser Goes Bear Hunting with a Switch, Buford Pusser Walking Tall, The Legend of Buford Pusser, Mama Will Spend Christmas in Heaven This Year, and Buford Pusser's Child. When discussing the State Line mob to reporters and how he vowed to shut them all down, quote, "The old State Line business had been open for years," Buford said. "A lot of these people honed in on Corinth, Mississippi after Phoenix City, Alabama was closed down. The average person does not know that 500 to 600 cases of untaxed beer and 100 cases of raw whiskey were coming into our county per week. Murders were going on at the State Line regular as clockwork. At one time, there were 4 or 5 of the FBI's 10 most wanted men staying at the Shamrock Motel. It was a stopping point from north to south. They would go to North Carolina and pull a safe job and then come back to spend money, then go to Oklahoma for a bank job. James Earl Ray, accused assassin of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., used the motel as his headquarters during the 1950s. On December 25, 1968, a call came in that a drunk employee of the McNairy County Highway Department, 50-year-old Charles Russ Hamilton, had threatened his landlord with a pistol, firing it a few times in the air. When Buford showed up that Christmas night, knocking on the door, he was told to come inside. Charles shot at him with a .25 caliber automatic, giving Buford a superficial wound on his stomach. He fell to the floor, grabbed his revolver, firing a fatal shot to Charles in the head. Buford said the wound on his stomach burned and bled quite a bit, but, quote, "I'm gonna be all right." He refused to go to the hospital. Buford said, quote, "Over a period of years, Charles has killed his wife and mother about 20 years ago and went to the penitentiary for it. He killed a deputy sheriff in McNairy County many years ago and 2 people in Alabama. He has been in and out of prison all his life. The man was awful bad to get drunk. I had been to his house about 6 weeks ago to talk to him about drinking and causing trouble."
During your reign here as McNairy County Sheriff, you have been forced to kill 2 persons. Louise Hathcock, who you killed near the state line at the Shamrock Motel there, and then Charles Russell Hamilton that you killed here in Selmer. Does the fact that you had to take these two human lives ever haunt you?
Yes, of course. I've seen Miss Hathcock 1,000 times, I guess, since I had to take her life, and also Mr. Hamilton. I mean, you watch someone die that you know that you pulled the trigger that killed them, because even though that is line of duty and self-defense, I mean, you still can't keep from seeing them and watch them draw that last breath, and then not think anything about it, I believe.
Petey Plunk was one of Buford Pusser's deputies for 5 years. Plunk and Chief Deputy Sheriff Jim Moffitt was with Buford the day he killed Louise Hathcock at the Shamrock Motel near the Tennessee-Mississippi state line on February 1st, 1966. Petey, when Buford got the call to come to the Shamrock, what happened during the ride down there?
Well, at that time we was driving along, and I said, Buford, since we're going down there, you better put your pistol on. He didn't have his pistol on. And, well, he said it might not be a bad idea. He stopped on the side of the road out there and put his pistol on. Buckled his gun on. We went on down and walked into the officer's motel. Used the exact words that she said. What in the hell are y'all doing down here? And I tried to tell her what we was doing down there, that we were looking for this lady's purse. The lady lost her purse in the motel that night. I said, I don't know nothing about no purse. No, I said, there's no car. I said, ain't nobody stole no car. I said, Louise, we're not hunting a damn car. We're hunting a purse. I said, that's what they do. They're all the time talking like that. Jim Moffitt was sitting over there on the couch. I guess he must have smiled. I wasn't looking at Jim. She said, wipe that smile off your face. And I guess Jim did, undoubtedly. She didn't slap him. But she said, Sheriff, I want to speak to you a minute. So Buford proceeded to follow her out of the office into number 1 cabin, which was her living quarters. And as he got inside of the door of the number 1 cabin, she had on a sweater with pockets in it. And she had this little snub-nosed .38 in there. And she come out with that .38 and said, I'm going to kill you. And as she wheeled with the gun, Buford seen her, and he fell across the bed, just as she fired. And then from the looks of it, she had fired at the big part of him, which was his chest. And as he went down, put his head where his chest would normally have been, and I'd say she missed his head approximately 4 inches. The bullet went out the window, into the post that holds the shed up in front of the office. And unless they put a new post there, and I doubt it, you'll see a chip chopped out of there now. It's where I took a hatchet and cut the bullet out of the post that she had fired it in. But as he went down and she fired, he come out with his .41 Magnum. He fired. The first shot, he hit her on the left side of the neck and cut a trench across her neck and shoulder. And it spun her around. And as she spun around, she still had the gun in firing position to fire again. The next shot hit her in the right breast and come out of her back. And you can stick a doorknob in her back where the bullet come out. She hit the floor, hit a chair, turned the chair over, hit the floor on her back, and she raised the gun up again. The next shot, he caught her in the left jaw, underneath her jawbone, and come out the back of her head. Carried one of her jaw teeth about 12 inches behind her head, out through her head there. She still blowed blood bubbles after her, I'd say. Of course, I was scared. Hell, I don't know, it might have been hers long, but I'd say roughly 3 or 4 minutes before she died.
Well, was Louise Hathcock drinking heavily that day?
Yes, she had a mixed drink in her hand down this house.
Well, was she drunk?
Yes, definitely drunk. Dope or something. She was bad off somewhere. I've never heard anybody, man or woman, talk any more vulgar than that woman talked to us that morning.
How did Buford react after killing Louise Hathcock?
When I got to Buford, when I heard the shots, I run to him with my pistol in my hand. You could tell by the looks of his eyes, of course. I don't know whether he was scared or excited or what, but I could see his eyes was red around him a little bit, you know. He told me, he says, catch the back door So we knew there was somebody in the back room because we heard her talking to him, see. He told me to catch your back door and told Jim Moffitt to call the sheriff's office. And I don't know, Jim said he wasn't scared, but I was scared.
Why were you scared?
Well, knowing the reputation and the kind of characters that hung out at the place, I figured we would have to shoot our way out. And I still say, if that bunch had been there, we would have had to shoot our way out of it.
How far was the Mississippi state line from the Shamrock Motel?
Well, just an imaginary line through there. Just really one right on the other side of the other. The cafe was in Mississippi and the motel was in Tennessee.
Well, what kind of person was Louise Hathcock?
Well, I just assumed I'd compare with Al Capone. Just assumed had Al Capone gunning for him as Louise Hathcock.
In late March of 1969, Buford had a meeting with the State Revenue Department officials in Nashville, where he proposed attaining tax from the 500 cases of untaxed beer he had just seized a few days prior from 37-year-old Donald Dawson. He was from Alabama, driving a 2-ton U-Haul truck, and Buford had a sneaking suspicion, since this wasn't the first time a person was driving a U-Haul full of untaxed beer and whiskey, but about the 4th or 5th time. Donald had no license and 500 cases of untaxed beer inside of the U-Haul. Buford received a tip a few weeks before about there being a good chance that there was a lot of untaxed beer being brought into Tennessee from Kentucky. If that much beer had been purchased legally in Tennessee, it would have cost almost $5,000, and Buford figured that McNairy County would hopefully receive that tax revenue. The next month, Master Detective magazine honored Buford Pusser by naming him the National Police Officer of the Month. It was 6 pages, fully illustrated, reporting on major highlights of Buford's career, which didn't lack a bit in action, bloodshed, and the war on crime. Buford was now almost 32 years old and was put on a pedestal by so many who admired and loved him. In a statement to the magazine, District Attorney General Will Abernathy said, quote, "Your commendation of Sheriff Buford Pusser is well deserved. In honoring him, you also honor all good law officers throughout the land. It is fine to know that you seek to give such men the public commendation they deserve." Governor Ellington stated, quote, "A law enforcement officer occupies an important place in a community, and we commend Sheriff Pusser and the dedication with which he has discharged his responsibilities." In July of 1969, older people standing around the Selmer, Tennessee courthouse said that Buford Pusser carried out the most comedic raid. 28-year-old Matthew Bo Whitley of McNairy County had an illegal steal operation with 33-year-old Philip McLean. Buford had been in the hospital for a while getting more operations on his jaw, and he had just got back in the office, not feeling too great, when deputies found Bo's 1,250-gallon moonshine tank 12 miles away on a little dirt road. But that's not all they discovered. Buford did not feel like getting out in the heat. It was 100 degrees in the shade, and it was in the heat of the afternoon around 2:30. One of the deputies got on the police radio to Buford, excitedly saying, quote, "We got him! We got him! Bo and Philip were up here trying to haul off the tank." Buford jumped out of his chair and said, "I can't believe this. What would have happened if we got all the way out there and found they had hauled that thing off?" The deputy went and picked up Buford in his air-conditioned police car. Buford recalled, quote, "I drove around the tree line and saw this old beat-up pickup truck with Philip hanging on for dear life on top of the steel. I yelled, 'How are you boys?' Bo said, 'Not too good,' and I said, 'Fine, you're under arrest.'" Bo was pretty shocked, but nicer than you'd think about the situation. He told Sheriff Pusser, quote, "Sheriff, why didn't you get here 4 hours ago and arrest us? It's too hot in this sun for this kind of work. We came back to get the tank because we thought you forgot about it." Buford had a big smile on his face. Bo said, quote, "Nobody was more surprised than me when you guys drove up and caught me." Buford replied, "Listen, Bo, we were all pretty surprised to see you here. We thought you boys would be long gone." Buford thought the news reporters were coming to take pictures, saying, quote, "I thought you might want to see a real steel get blown up, so I told my boys to hold it." Buford took off to the steel to destroy it. A reporter asked him, "Hey, Sheriff, what happens if the moonshiners beat us out there and take the steel?" Buford said they wouldn't dare. Buford and the news reporters arrived awaiting deputies and State Alcoholic Beverage Commission agents to get there with dynamite. When they finally got there, Bo helped them set out the 6 sticks of dynamite under the moonshine equipment. He was even giving out suggestions about how if they packed some mud, it would help completely destruct the tank, which came from a service station. The dynamite exploded, with metal shards flying hundreds of feet into the air, and everyone got doused in mash. Bo and Philip were charged with making mash illegally and possessing moonshine equipment. While Bo was being charged, he said, quote, "Well, there goes another good thing up in smoke. I guess I need 6 months off anyway." Buford responded, quote, "I wouldn't worry about it, Bo. The judge is likely to give you more than 6 months off." Bo and Philip had a $1,000 bond, and they were very well acquainted with Buford, so he said he wouldn't jail them immediately, asking Bo, "You won't go anywhere, will you, Bo?" Bo answered, "Sheriff, you know all my customers are in McNairy County. Would you mind giving me and Philip a ride home?" Buford kindly did so. He said, quote, "I can't see being mean to anybody that isn't mean to me. That's the secret of law enforcing." In August of 1969, Charles Thompson was writing a piece for the Tennessean newspaper. He went on a ride-along with the mostly gentle Giant Sheriff the previous month and saw some action during the ride. Sitting in the new, supercharged black Ford with racing red stripes, Buford had a lead foot on the gas, asking the reporter if it was too fast for him. Charles told him it runs really fast, but that he was a damn good driver. That hot July night, Buford had his AR-15 laid across his dashboard as they rode down a back road where Buford came to a stop in front of someone's house. There were 6 men hanging out in the front yard drinking beer. Buford hollered, "How are you boys doing?" To which one replied, "Screw you, you dumb son of a bitch." Buford told Charles, "Excuse me," as he started to remove his gray coat, loosen up his tie, and placed his .357 Magnum pistol on the front seat as he got out of the car unarmed. He told Charles, "Can't have them mouthing off like that or every tough guy in town will hear about it and my life will be hell. I learned that a long time ago. I've got to teach him a lesson he'll likely not forget for some time to come." Charles had no idea what to expect, but Buford landed a blow to the drunk man's stomach, who smarted off to him. The hit shocked the intoxicated man, who was pretty big himself, as he threw up a little. Buford gave him a few kicks with his polished oxblood shoes, picked up the drunk man, and threw him in the air. The man landed on the ground so hard that his body made a large thudding sound, and lastly, Buford backhanded the snot out of him. He asked the man, "Had enough?" There was no answer. "I guess he has," Buford said as he stared down the rest of the men who were standing around. He scooped up the last case of beer and said to them as he put the case in his trunk, quote, "You boys have had enough for tonight, or you wouldn't have been so rude. I don't mind taking a drink, but manners are very important." While the majority loved Buford and he had many fans, he was disliked by many, and not just criminals. One person who wasn't a fan of Buford was Leslie Houston, the editor of the Tennessee Valley Appeal in Adamsville, Tennessee, Buford's own hometown. Leslie said that even though Buford was hailed a hero in Memphis, Nashville, and Jackson, and he had a big-time movie and television series coming out about him, plus a song written about him, that Buford had only made this worse in McNairy County over the 5 years he'd been sheriff. Leslie claimed there were more beer joints in McNairy than ever before. Sheriff Pusser said that was a bunch of bull, that those allegations were politically inspired, and Leslie was just jealous of him. The day after Buford got into a tussle with the intoxicated man, Charles was at the Adamsville Center when he spotted the man. His mouth was swollen, and he told Charles, "Man, I had so much to drink last night that I cussed out Buford Pusser. Never again. He kicked the hell out of me. I plan to apologize when I see him." Later, Buford said the man did apologize and he was happy to accept it, saying, quote, "I don't hold grudges when a man is sorry." Charles wrote in the article, quote, "I'm not saying Buford Pusser is a white knight. That night was police brutality in the pure and literal sense. I don't think Buford's image of himself seats him on a charger either." 2 weeks later, Hollywood crews came to chronicle Buford Pusser's life and create a movie for the masses. Writer, director, and producer Mort Briskin spent a few days in McNairy learning about Buford Pusser. The movie was to be produced for Paramount Studios. On top of that, a television series was in production for ABC to be released in September of 1970. Buford would finally have enough money to pay off his 5 surgeries, Pauline's funeral expenses, and take care of their 3 children. Mort Briskin told Buford that he would have to clean the movie up a little for the audience, because a lot of the things Buford had done and gone through, people wouldn't understand. Robert Mitchum was to play Buford in the movie, but it was still a toss-up as to whether he would or not, because Mort wanted the same actor to play in the movie and the television series. Buford told Charles that he thought Robert Mitchum might be a little too fat and lazy to play him. Quote, "I exercise every day. I ride my bike up and down the road. If I don't, I won't be able to maintain tough people." He talked about having to kill the 2 people that he did, and had nightmares about it because he never wanted to kill anyone. Buford said, quote, "Manhandle a man, bend a pistol barrel over his head, wound him if you have to, but don't kill him. A human life is impossible to get back." When Buford spoke about his 8-year-old daughter, Dewana, he lit up with joy. Quote, "She's only 8 years old, and yet when she feels like going to Memphis to visit my sister, she just gets on a Greyhound bus by herself and rides there. She has a book of telephone numbers in her little purse, and when she gets to Memphis, she calls my sister. She's not afraid of anything. Why, you couldn't even get me on a county school bus by myself when I was 8 years old." Dewana said she was so scared that someone was going to hurt her daddy really bad because they had so many times before. She was also terrified that someone would poison her dogs and pony and might carry her off to the swamps. Whenever her mother, Pauline, died, Dewana accompanied her grandmother to choose the casket. Dewana shielded her eyes whenever she would see hearses after that experience. At that time, Buford had not told his daughter how her mom died, and the grandmother, Buford's mom, said she felt it was a mistake that he had not opened up to her about it, and she even said that Buford should take her to the place where it happened and show her. Dewana said, quote, "Every morning I get up and go into my daddy's room. If he's gone, I know that something terrible has happened to somebody in the county. I hope nothing ever happens to Daddy again." Buford told Charles for his article that the press already had his obituary written up to be put in the paper at any time because of how often his life was being put in danger. He didn't think he was some invincible man who was untouchable. Quote, "I believe strongly in God. I think it was His will that I lived. I just wish that it had been possible for Pauline to live too." In October of 1969, Buford was back in the hospital. He fell asleep at the wheel of his car and was trapped for 2 hours off the highway. He broke his jaw and his cheekbone. In February of 1970, Buford was one of 3 young Tennesseans named by the Tennessee Jaycees as the Outstanding Young Men of 1969 for his relentless pursuit of law and order. He was also made Honorary Sergeant at Arms of the Tennessee House of Representatives in 1969. At the time, Buford was the county chairman of the Cerebral Palsy Fund and for the last 2 years had been on the West Tennessee Dignitary Panel. Hollywood bigwigs had not forgotten about Sheriff Pusser. It was reported in March of 1970 that Bing Crosby Productions made an announcement that it would be making the movie of Buford Pusser's story. October was said to be the month that they would start filming on location in Selmer and Memphis. The name of the movie would be Walking Tall. Mort Briskin said he didn't think things would start until July or August of 71. It was said that until he had the production schedule set, he couldn't hire a director or any cast members, as they would only sign contracts if there was a specific starting date. Buford couldn't run for re-election for sheriff in 1970, since the term limit was in effect. However, he did announce in March that he was running for governor as an independent. A reporter asked, "Will you really run for governor?" He responded, "I've been contacted by several backers of the late Governor Frank G. Clement, and after much discussion, I decided to run. I believe the governor's office should be open at all times for the people of all walks of life so they can discuss their problems and offer ideas. If elected, this will be one of my policies." The reporter also asked, "How about the movie on your life by Bing Crosby Productions?" He replied, "They will start shooting it at the last of May. I have read the script and it's okay." But, focusing on his possible future as governor, Buford was worried because when he was shot in the car with his wife, he had not been able to completely repair his speech because some of his tongue was also shot off. He said that it might be a handicap if he ran for governor. Buford said if he did decide to run and he lost, or if he decided not to run at all, he would look for another job in law enforcement on a state or federal level. In May of 1970, the Knoxville News-Sentinel reported that Clint Walker was being considered for the role of Buford Pusser in the Walking Tall movie. The same month, Buford also decided not to run for governor, saying he was physically unable to make the race. Buford was not going to be able to handle the stress of campaigning because of his complications with his jaw and tongue. In September of 1970, Buford Pusser was no longer sheriff of McNairy County. As his term was up, he handed his badge over to Clifford Coleman. Buford was sad yet relieved as he congratulated Clifford and closed that chapter of his life. When asked what he planned to do next, he said, quote, "I'm not really sure as of yet. I'm going to rest for a while. I have some work to do at home and then I'll make a decision." A few weeks later, Buford was given a key to the city of Memphis by Mayor Loeb, who stood beside the Ballad of Buford Pusser writer and singer Eddie Long. By November of 1971, Buford was ready to get back into law enforcement. At the time, he was building a new house because his home had recently burned down a few weeks prior. He was looking forward to a book on his life written by W.R. Morris of Coleman, Alabama, being published. It was titled 12th of August, which is of course the tragic day his wife was killed. It was supposed to be released any day by the Aurora Publishing Company of Nashville. When asked about the ambush and investigation, Buford said, quote, "The trigger man was killed about 6 to 8 months later. There's still a chance some arrest will be made in the case." Former Deputy Sheriff Jim Moffitt spoke about Buford always going on calls without other officers. Quote, "He's just that type of man. He never asked anybody for anything." Buford told the Leaf Chronicle newspaper that now bootlegging and gambling were not as big of a problem as narcotics were beginning to be. He said, quote, "It's getting into the schools and it's on the upswing all over the county. The sheriff's department don't seem to be doing anything about it." In January of 1972, Buford, who was still serving as constable of Adamsville, was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, destroying property, larceny, and official oppression. 29-year-old towboat pilot Thomas Edmund Pickens claimed Buford stopped his car on January 1st while he and his buddies were leaving a bar. He went on to claim that Buford beat the top of his car in, took his hunting shotgun, and that he was a victim of official oppression. Thomas also said that he filed a complaint with the FBI, alleging that Buford violated his civil rights. Buford said his political enemies were out to get him, that they'd rather see him die than be back in office, and this was all a political trap. He posted a $1,000 bond after he was made to go to Sheriff Clifford Coleman's office. Buford argued that he was only acting out of fear for his life and signed a warrant against Thomas Pickens. He said, quote, "Even though I have made no statement concerning plans about running for sheriff this year, a lot of people, including enemies I made while cracking down on illegal whiskey, think I will be a candidate." Recalling the January incident, he said, quote, "The January 1st trouble started on the premises of a nightclub in the southern part of the county. I stopped my automobile at the edge of the nightclub premises and was merely observing the club when Mr. Pickens, along with 4 other men, walked out from the building. Pickens walked to his vehicle, removed a shotgun, and fired once into the air. Then he asked me if I wanted trouble. When I replied no, he began to curse and threaten me. I left the premises later to discover Pickens' vehicle following close behind. A vehicle approaching from the rear almost claimed my life on the morning of August 12, 1967, and since that time, fear grips my body when I feel I am being followed. The shotgun in the vehicle behind could send bullets ripping into my head at any minute, I thought. When I came to a lighted area only a few feet from the state line, I decided to halt my automobile and inquire why these people were choosing to follow me. When I left the automobile, Pickens came out of his vehicle with a loaded shotgun. After a scuffle, I was successful in gaining control of the weapon. Pickens got back into his car and left, and that was the last I heard about it until I received a telephone call from my mother telling me that the sheriff's department wanted to talk to me. The last that I could find on that story was that Buford was out on bond. A few months later, in July of 1972, filming started for Walking Tall in the counties of McNairy, Chester, and Madison. There was a reception held at a Holiday Inn hotel where residents, the stars, producer, and director all mingled. Joe Don Baker was chosen to play the part of Buford Pusser, and Elizabeth Hartman would play the part of his wife, Pauline. Mort Briskin, the producer, and the director, Phil Carlson, wrote Buford's story about triumph and tragedy of an ex-Marine and ex-wrestler who became sheriff of a small town. A man who said he would never carry a big gun, only a big stick. A sheriff who got rid of all the gambling, illegal booze, and fought a war on crime that would ultimately lead to the death of his beloved wife. Not everyone was happy about the film being made. City officials said the counties involved would have nothing to gain but a black eye from the production of such a movie. The mayor, Billy Glover, said about the movie, quote, "The plot of this story has little, if any, resemblance to the truth." However, Buford's lawyer, Lloyd Tatum, who actually plays a district attorney in Walking Tall who goes against him, said that the movie was a fairly accurate depiction of Buford's life, even though some incidents that really happened are not in the movie, because the director said if all of that was included, people actually wouldn't believe it. So, they actually had to leave out a lot of things that really happened to make the movie more realistic to the audience. In 1972, Buford ran for sheriff against Clifford Coleman, but he lost. He blamed his defeat on the controversy around the filming of Walking Tall. When the movie was released in theaters, there were a lot of mixed reviews, but most of them were good. Buford said he believed the movie may have rubbed some people the wrong way, but it was pretty accurate. About meeting so many people over the months and being hailed a celebrity, and what he thought about the movie, he said, quote, "It's all like a dream, as if this were all happening to someone else. I'm not exactly happy with the movie. Oh, it is basically true, dramatized of course, but you expect that. What I don't like is the cursing, the bad language. Okay, so I say a bad word once in a while, but not like that. And all the things those men are saying, I don't think it was necessary. It is really hard for people who don't know me to separate fact from fiction. The more the tale is told, the bigger the bear gets." The author of the book, The 12th of August, said he was quite disappointed in the movie because it wasn't Buford's actual life story in full. When Buford was asked if he was going to run for sheriff again, he said, quote, "I have no plans to get back into politics in the foreseeable future." In July of 1973, a new song came out on RCA Records by Dave Hall, which he named The Ballad of Buford Pusser, unrelated to Eddie Long's song from years past. There was also a TV series in the works. The first 6 weeks of Walking Tall being in theaters brought in $1.6 million to the box office. Buford had also undergone another operation due to his eye trying to pop out of socket, getting over 100 stitches under his eye, left temple, and into his scalp. That made operation number 16 or 17. As far as making appearances all over national television while the movie was in theaters, he said, quote, "See, I don't claim to be no smart fella. I'm not putting on no airs, and I figure everybody puts on his britches one leg at a time. I might be nervous if I hadn't already been on TV shows in Portland, San Francisco, and many other cities. I think it's real important that I keep setting a good example because now I've got so many young people that's looking up to me. All ages, but a lot of them are young people." Recalling one group of kids who went to see the movie, quote, "They said that whenever they got to feeling lonesome or homesick, they'd go see it, and they'd cry, and they'd feel better." Remembering one meeting that really moved him, he said, quote, "This boy was hurt on a motorcycle, and they said he would be a vegetable, that he would never walk again. They carried him to see the movie, and he was wanting to meet me. He was in a wheelchair, and I went out and presented him with a stick, and he wouldn't have his picture made in a wheelchair. He said, 'I can stand.' So I kind of braced him to where he could stand up to have the picture made." The boy's name was Randy, and a few weeks later he sent Buford a message through a friend saying, quote, "The next time you see me, I'll be walking tall." Buford said, quote, "Sure enough, the next Saturday night at this friend's house, who comes walking around the house but Randy on them crutches, and he said wheelchairs are for cripples. and I really feel that I, helped inspire that boy to walk. Not only that, but Eddie Long, who wrote so many songs about Buford, was working in law enforcement. Eddie said, quote, "Buford got me appointed police chief of Finger, Tennessee, a small town of about 250 people where Buford's uncle is mayor. I do benefits for the town, help them get such things as streetlights and government grants. It's not just a title, I really work at the job." Tragically, on August 20th, 1974, Buford the Bull Pusser's life went up in flames as his 13-year-old daughter Dewana witnessed it. Buford had a horrible wreck in his 1974 Corvette on a hill of US 64 in McNairy County. He was halfway between Selmer, Tennessee and his home in Adamsville. Buford had been at the McNairy County Fair in Selmer, Tennessee, and he was headed home when he accidentally ran off the highway, hit an embankment, and the car caught fire after Buford was ejected out of the vehicle. Dewana was in a car in front of her father with her friends when Buford passed them, sped up, and slowed down. She said the car jerked and went all the way across the road. She jumped out and ran to her dad where he was laying on the ground. Dewana said that the last thing her dad said before he died was, "Dewana, Dewana." At 11:55 p.m., right after the accident, Buford Pusser was pronounced deceased on arrival at the McNairy County General Hospital. Buford's car was so badly messed up that police could not tell if he had a blowout or what exactly went wrong with the car or what caused the accident. Skid marks indicated that he lost control of his car a few hundred feet from where the car stopped. Foul play was suspected but eventually ruled out by the Tennessee Highway Patrol. Captain Jerry Simmons said, quote, "We consider this just another unfortunate highway accident. We took the tie rods and the power steering cylinder, but only to keep anyone from messing around with them and starting any wild rumors. It's our belief that the tie rods broke on impact. None of the parts are missing and the jagged ends fit together perfectly." Adamsville Police Chief James Robertson said about Buford, quote, "He was just an old-timey sheriff. Some people were jealous that he became so famous, but generally he was well liked. But one thing's for sure, he cleaned up this county while he was sheriff 'cause it was a hellhole when he got it." In November of 1974, Buford's white 1975 Continental Town coupe that he bought right before he died was going on sale at a special auction at the Godfather's restaurant in Memphis. Offers went as high as $25,000 through people calling and asking about the car. The only way to bid on Buford's car would be in writing, with a 25% cashier's check of the total bid and mailed to them. Buford's daughter Dewana and Buford's dad Carl were invited out as special guests. The chairman of the Buford Pusser Memorial Park in Adamsville worked on getting all deputies to show up who worked with Buford too. I didn't find how much the car went for, but the owner, Frank Liberto, expected to get at least $50,000 for it just from the phone call offers that he was receiving. In 2006, Dewana Pusser was tired of all the conspiracies around how her mother died and how her dad supposedly shot her himself, as well as the allegations that he murdered Louise Hathcock by shooting her in the back. She was tired of the old wounds being ripped back open time and time again when she knew what these people said wasn't true. The one thing she said she will always believe in her heart is that even though the police said her father's car wreck was an accident, she doesn't and never will think so. Dewana believes the car was rigged somehow and that he was murdered. Before his death, Buford was asked if he would do it all over again if he could. Quote, If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't. When I think of what I lost, Pauline's death, it just wasn't worth it. No, I wouldn't do it over again. And that concludes the story of Buford Pusser. Before I sign off, I want to give a shout out to everyone on patreon.com/reverytruecrime. Thank you so much to Amanda, Zane, Gigi, Rachel, Steve, Stephanie, Rob, Angel, TZ, Badcast Company, Jade, Matt, Chelsea, and Lorraine. All of your support means so much to me. Thank you again for listening to this episode, and until next time, stay safe and take care.